On April 25, 1986, Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant Unit 4 appeared harmless, with the control room in an ordinary, routine state. Machines hummed, and operators discussed procedures. Upon observation from the exterior, it appeared to be an ordinary shift ending. Unbeknownst to the city of Pripyat, about 3 kilometers away, a horrific event was brewing. 80,000 people lived within the city limits, many of them innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of a nuclear disaster. The reactor was shut down for a scheduled safety test, intended to determine if it could continue generating power despite shutting down, allowing emergency diesel generators to kick in. However, this test had previously failed. Due to regional power demands, plant managers postponed the shutdown for hours. The less trained night shift took control, operating the reactor below its intended safe limits. As they reduced power, an unexpected failure occurred. The safety systems were disabled, and the reactor's output plummeted dangerously. According to the operating rules, the test should have been abandoned immediately upon observing its instability. However, priority was placed on completing the task, even at the expense of safety. Despite concerns expressed by engineers, the decision was made to recover power. Control rods were withdrawn beyond the maximum limits, which led to immediate alarms and some acknowledged interruptions. Others were silenced under pressure. Even though these actions violated standard procedures, they were justified as temporary and necessary due to the reactor's design flaws. According to Soviet nuclear norms, achieving the task was more important than following precise instructions. By midnight, Unit 4 was operating outside its intended safe limits. The core temperature rose rapidly, unevenly distributed power, and unpredictable reactor activity. While some believed catastrophe was imminent, everyone inside the control room knew that what they were doing was the only way to avoid an even greater catastrophe. As preparations continued, the control room remained quiet. The test was about to begin. Fueled by pressure to complete, engineers dared to disregard safety protocols, all knowing the reactor's instability. Around midnight, Unit 4 was no longer safe. Its core temperature reached unbearable levels, its balance on a knife's edge. Yet no one believed catastrophe was upon them. The control room spoke softly. The safety test was about to begin. At 1:23 a.m., the safety test at Unit 4 began according to plan. However, the reactor yawned beyond safe limits after a series of decisions led to the current impossible situation. The RBMK reactor was unpredictable at lower power levels, causing wild shifts in reactivity as it operated at an unstretched limit. The sudden collapse of bubbles in the core at low power levels created an opportunity for reactivity increase. Power spikes appeared across the core, unremarkable but hazardous. In the control room, operators were unsure if the readings were a result of temporary fluctuations or a severe flaw in the reactor. The time running out led to an emergency shutdown despite the reactor's instability. The shift supervisor opted to continue, fearing failure. The situation was dire as pressure from management increased. While debating options, they chose to continue. The instability accelerated, causing operators to make a hasty decision designed to save the reactor. The control rods were inserted into the core, absorbing and stopping the nuclear reaction. However, the theoretical outcome differed from reality. The flaw in the control rods allowed the core to flood with hot water, melting fuel channels, and transferring radioactive material into the atmosphere. Radiation levels skyrocketed, significantly exceeding the limits of available equipment. The initial explosion damaged internal components, creating a second explosion that burst the reactor building and the protective cover. In less than 3 seconds of continuous operation, Unit 4 crumbled. Inside the control room, operators were terrorized by the shock waves, the collapse, and the rising radiation. Struggling with a weapon they never comprehended, they remained oblivious to the growing danger. In the hours that followed, the world watched as Unit 4 continued disintegrating, leaving a path of death and radioactive destruction in its wake. The explosions at 01:23:40 did not sound like thunder. They were dull, heavy, unnatural, as if the building itself had violently exhaled. Inside the control room, operators were thrown to the floor, Ceiling panels collapsed. Glass shattered. For several seconds, no one spoke. Dust filled the air. Then alarms began screaming from every direction. No one understood what had happened. According to everything they had been taught, a nuclear reactor could not explode. The RBMK design was considered stable and safe. In a worst-case scenario, it should shut down, not destroy itself. That belief delayed every critical decision. Operators returned to their panels. Instrument readings were chaotic. Some meters showed zero power, others impossible spikes. Radiation indicators maxed out, falsely suggesting levels that were dangerous but survivable. In reality, radiation levels were thousands of times higher. Engineers reported what they believed was partial damage, ruptured pipes, possibly a hydrogen explosion. No one considered that the reactor core no longer existed. Outside, the disaster was already visible. The concrete lid had been torn away. The core lay open to the night sky. Graphite blocks and radioactive debris were scattered across the grounds, some glowing faintly in the darkness. Workers approached the debris, unaware of the danger. One kicked a block. Another picked one up, calling it warm. Within seconds, they received fatal doses. At that moment, they felt nothing. Radiation is invisible, silent, odorless. Inside the control room, emergency procedures began based on a fatal misunderstanding. Operators believed the core was intact. Water was pumped into the reactor. There was nothing left to cool. The water instantly turned to steam, carrying radioactive particles into the atmosphere. Every action made the situation worse. Critical data from these minutes is missing. Some logs were never recorded. Others were lost or overwritten. What is known is this: no one in charge understood the full scale of the disaster for hours. A strange blue glow rose above the reactor, later identified as Chernobyl radiation. It was beautiful. It was deadly. In Pripyat, residents watched from balconies. Children stared at the glowing sky. No warnings were issued. No evacuation was ordered. Firefighters were already on their way. They were told there was a fire on the roof. They were not told what was burning. By sunrise, the reactor was an open wound, bleeding radiation into the world, and those fighting it still did not understand what they were facing. The first fire alarm at Chernobyl sounded minutes after the explosion. To dispatchers, it seemed routine. A roof fire, damaged electrical equipment. Nothing unusual for an industrial facility of that size. No one mentioned radiation. Fire crews from Pripyat and nearby towns responded immediately. Among the first was Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, only 23 years old. As he and his men stepped out of their trucks, they sensed something was wrong. The night air felt heavy. A metallic taste filled their mouths. Above the reactor building, a strange blue glow rose into the sky. They were given one simple order: the roof is on fire, put it out. Pravik's crew climbed ladders toward the reactor hall roof. Beneath their boots lay chunks of black graphite, radioactive reactor material. The firefighters didn't know what it was. They treated it like ordinary debris. Their boots began to soften. Some felt heat through their gloves. Others noticed a burning sensation on their skin. Radiation burns cause no immediate pain. Damage begins silently, at the cellular level. By the time symptoms appear, it is already too late. Inside the plant, engineers continued to fight the disaster based on a fatal misunderstanding. They believed the reactor core was still intact. Orders were issued to pump water and seal valves. Workers were sent into zones where radiation levels were lethal within minutes. Many obeyed without hesitation. One operator entered a corridor near the reactor hall and collapsed within seconds. Others reported dizziness, nausea, confusion. Some began vomiting almost immediately, an early sign of extreme exposure. Still, no evacuation order was given. In Pripyat, life went on. Residents watched the strange glow from balconies. Children played outside. Couples walked the streets, unaware that radioactive particles were settling on their clothes and skin. Firefighters worked without protective gear. No respirators, no radiation suits. Just standard uniforms meant for flames, not invisible radiation. By dawn, many were already dying. Faces swelled, skin turned red, then purple. Headaches became unbearable. Vomiting was constant. They were rushed to hospitals, then flown to Moscow. Doctors were unprepared. Some firefighters begged for water. Others asked why their skin was peeling away. Nurses noticed that even touching them caused burns. Within weeks, many would be dead. Lieutenant Pravik died on May 11, 1986. He was buried in a sealed coffin. Only 36 hours after the explosion did authorities order the evacuation of Pripyat. Residents were told they would be gone for 3 days. They never returned. The first responders did their duty. They followed orders. They ran toward danger. What failed them was not courage. It was information. That night, the men on the roof did not know they were stepping into history and into death. Contaminated radiation leaked from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster before widespread recognition arrived on April 26, 1986. Soviet officials initially misled about the extent of the explosion, leading to a slow, deliberate dissemination of facts. Within the country, the first line of defense was silence. Despite initial damage to the plant managers and regional authorities in Soviet zones hesitated to recognize the catastrophe, fearing potential consequences to their careers and political futures. Meanwhile, information was carefully filtered, softened, and delayed, avoiding terms such explosion and meltdown. In Pripyat, daily life continued. Although people knew something catastrophic had occurred, education was maintained, children played, and shops functioned. Workers at the nuclear power plant in Sweden unintentionally triggered radiation alarms, leading to international attention and further investigations. Afterward, international pressure compelled Soviet authorities to acknowledge the true extent of the Chernobyl disaster. The situation was reassuringly under control, and radiation levels were safe. However, the cost was immense, personal, and permanent. Thousands perished or lived with lasting health effects, including children growing up without their loving fathers and mothers. Other victims faced stigma, silence, and illness. Today, the horrific event is remembered as a cautionary tale about the consequences of delayed truth, controlling information, and choosing silence over responsibility. Chernobyl has forever changed global nuclear safety standards, questioning the role of institutions and shaken trust in authorities. The memory of the Chernobyl disaster remains haunting, not just for its impact on nuclear safety, but as a cautionary tale about the power of truth and transparency, the importance of listening to others, and the unwavering commitment to responsibility.